Welcome back. Thanks for staying with us. Police have been slammed for a lack of evidence in a case against 14 men initially accused of raping several women in the Krugersdorp mine dumps in late July. It's also alleged that police continue to conduct unlawful arrests. It all comes after rape charges against 13 men and a minor were withdrawn this week. However, the case of contravening the Immigration Act stands. For more on this, we're now joined by activist and researcher Lisa Vetten from the University of Johannesburg. Lisa, very good evening to you. Thank you so much for your time. What was your reaction as we learned of the 14 suspects not being linked to the rape, but facing one charge of the Immigration Act? I mean, surely with all the hype and all the police going out in their numbers to make these arrests, one would have expected that somebody is held accountable.
The outcome was extraordinarily disappointing. I mean, especially if one looks at the broader context in the way in which the complainants in this matter were treated by the police. I mean, not only did the police, for reasons we have yet to hear why, not only did they release their names and actual physical addresses via WhatsApp, but I think there was also a great deal of complaint about the lack of services offered to complainants by the Department of Social Development in particular. So I think the fact that there is now no suspects whatsoever must be even more devastating for the complainants.
Yeah.
I think the difficulty here was that, because of the enormous pressure on the police to make arrests, it's very possible that good detective work was sacrificed in favor of coming down heavy and hard and looking like you were going all out to make arrests. And I think good detective work was probably lost in that process.
Yeah, some civil society organizations have even suggested that it's perhaps best in cases like these for police to do their work quietly and not go public about some of the finer details when it comes to investigations.
Yes, absolutely. I think that's really important. I think they've also got to learn to find ways to be insulated from public pressure. And I also think there's a need for politicians to step out of these kinds of cases, because I think with them being there, it really ups the ante and it becomes really a performance of how spectacular the police are in solving crime, rather than an actual exercise and the practice of good detective work. So that's also got to happen. I think also, generally what this case is also symptomatic of is the broader problems that the police have in making arrests in stranger rape matters. The research that I've been engaged with over the years has consistently suggested that where stranger rapes are involved, the police are least likely to make arrests. And that has a lot to do, and that has everything to do, I think, with quality of investigation, what informants you have, what kind of evidence you gather in order to be able to try and track down somebody who's unknown to the complainant.
There's also some criticism around the NPA's announcement in August saying that several of the suspects have been positively linked to the rape, and all of a sudden that matter now has been swept under the carpet. That also pointing to something even bigger in concern.
I think so, and I think there are a lot of questions around the way in which the DNA evidence was analyzed that we need to know more about. I mean, this was going to be a very difficult case anyway, because it would, certainly from media reports, suggested that some of the men's faces were covered by balaclavas, which would already have made it difficult to identify them through eyewitnesses. It was also an incredibly chaotic, disorienting experience, which I think would also confuse complainants' memories. And then you also had the fact that this was a gang rape. So the kind of DNA evidence that you gather would be what we call complex samples. There was more than one suspect involved, which already makes it somewhat more difficult to extract good DNA evidence. So this does start to raise questions about just what was the quality of the evidence that was analyzed in the first place, and what were the kind of procedures that were followed by the laboratories.
Yeah, because the police minister says 300 DNA samples were collected and, the outcome was negative. What happens now to this case? I mean, what kind of police work will need to be conducted? Because this really was a horrific incident that really saw a lot of women, of course, in shock and in disappointment, and the country at large.
Well, exactly. And I mean, I think for those particular complainants, their sense of safety in the world has been profoundly disrupted. And as long as those individuals remain out there in the world, they may never quite feel entirely safe. So I think there really is an imperative to try and find these particular suspects. There are different options. Again, depending on the quality of the DNA evidence that was extracted, it's either possible to put that into the DNA database and see if it can be run against what is in the database already, to see if it picks up any other kinds of hits. As I said, there may well be some complexities here in the fact that these rapes involve more than one suspect. So that alone makes DNA analysis that much harder, but that's the one thing to do. I mean, the other question that still remains in my mind is the arrest of the former police officer, Dolphina Kruger, and the stolen items that she had in her possession. Mm-hmm. What does she know? Where did she get that information from? Then I think there's also a question of the degree to which the police use their informants to find out more information about what is going on. There's a question of how well they may have tried to track down those stolen items, where they went, who bought them. If cell phones are stolen, for instance, could they have tracked the use of those cell phones? So there are other investigative techniques that could have been applied and may have been applied, but we don't know without, I think, hearing more from the police themselves.
Yeah, more questions than answers here. Thank you so much for weighing in on this discussion.